Thank you, Megan. The last time I was up here after when a minister asked me to come do something similar was 15 years ago. It was September 18th of 2001. And I started thinking about this, that it's getting to be that if I'm up on stage, it's a bad sign. It's either that or I'm in charge of stewardship, and frankly, nobody wants to see you coming when you're doing that either. But today we are here to do something uplifting, honor our neighbors, and to remember and to pray. And I have to tell you that while I am pleased to be here, and while I find comfort in being here, I'm also getting really tired of doing this. My son is here tonight. He's 13 years old. And in the short time he has been on this planet, I have had to have conversations about topics like this with him way too many times. About why someone would shoot 20 children at a school in Connecticut. Why someone would open fire on college students in Blacksburg, kill soldiers in Fort Hood, set off a bomb at the marathon in Boston. I've tried to explain the unexplainable and make sense of the senseless, and frankly, I'm tired of it. Just 1 year ago, this very month, in June of last year, our family took a detour on our way to our annual beach trip up to North Carolina. We stopped by a church in Charleston, where a gunman had entered and shot dead the men and women who had invited them into their sanctuary, where a man looked in the eyes of a woman who had offered him a seat at her Bible study and pulled the trigger, and then reloaded the gun 5 times. My wife and I stood with our children on the streets in front of that church, Emmanuel African Methodist Church on Calhoun Street, and said a prayer for those victims. And again, I was glad that we did it, but I'm getting real tired of it. Time and again, my wife and I have struggled, like so many of you, so many of all of us, have struggled to understand how a God that we know, a God we know is good, can watch over so much evil. So, I'm glad that we can try to comfort each other tonight, and we can lift our voices and unburden our souls. But one of the conclusions I've come to is that gathering here is not enough. Tears are not enough. Though it may sound harsh, prayer is not enough. Several months ago, David actually gave a sermon that was along similar lines, and afterwards I told him it reminded me of one of my favorite quotes from Pope Francis. At least it's attributed to Pope Francis. I've had trouble sourcing it. And the quote that the Pope said was, "You pray for the hungry, and then you feed them. That's how prayer works." So I wonder, when we're done praying here, what are we going to do? To answer that, I think of words from the book of Romans: do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. I think there's power in those words, but I also think there's clear direction. It is such a human nature to want to react to violence with more violence, hatred with more hatred, anger with more anger. But the most powerful instances of change and transformation, I think, that I've seen, and most of you have probably seen, have been rooted in love. That's one of the things I've seen from watching so many tragedies through the years, is I learned that people are inherently good. Human beings are good. At our core, human beings want to help each other. I saw it on the streets of New York, when strangers who were holding pictures of loved ones they hadn't seen in days were wandering through the streets, hoping to find somebody who might have seen their brothers, their sisters, their aunts, their daughters, and strangers embraced them. People from one faith approached members of another and asked if they could pray. We've seen that same kind of thing here in Orlando in the past 3 days. We've seen people donating money, people holding vigils, strangers literally opening up their veins to try to save lives. I think tragedies have a tendency to bring out the best in us. When we witness the worst, we summon the best. When the big, bold, bad happens, we spring into action. But often, when we witness plain old sin, we just turn the other eye. That's where I think that we too often fall short. It's where I too often fall short. And the reason I think we do it, the reason I do it, is because it's easier. If someone you know says something derogatory about an entire class of people, it's easier just to let it slide. If someone you like says something you know in your heart is intolerant, it's easier to feign a smile or look away. If a politician says something that you know is prejudice or discriminatory or simply meant to divide, we often find reasons to excuse it. We like that candidate's stance on the war in Iraq. I think he's got some good ideas on education. Maybe she's going to do some good things with Social Security. So I'm just going to ignore that thing he or she said about Muslims, or Latinos, or Jews, or gays. We are very good at responding to big fiery explosions. I wonder if we're doing enough to combat the sparks. Now, please don't misunderstand me to say that I think anyone's silence or words caused the action that happened in downtown Orlando early Sunday morning any more than they did at the AME church up in Charleston last June. Words from one person will never excuse the actions of another. But sometimes those words can foster, nourish even, though that's a strange word choice, a culture of hate. If you hear someone say over and over again that one class of people is different, that they don't deserve the same rights as everyone else, that they should be kept at a distance, how can it not dehumanize them? How can it not, even if only subconsciously, devalue their lives? I think we have to do a better job of combating and confronting that devaluation. It's been said for a century or so, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Well, doing nothing is a choice, and I think we need to make better choices. There is so much about faith and tragedy that I simply don't understand, and I'll be honest with you when I tell you that as a lifelong Christian, I fall short when it comes to understanding the simple concept that we all wrestle with about how a gracious God can allow so many bad things to happen. Some of you may know this about my family, but 18 years ago, when Cindy and I moved to Orlando and joined this church, and by the way, she's in New York for a trip she planned with our daughter to celebrate her 16th birthday a long time ago, otherwise she would be here. But when Cindy and I moved to Orlando to join this church, right after we joined, I think it was actually the month, our family was rocked by a tragedy that was really, really hard to comprehend. Cindy's father had just retired from a life of working at a bank in Fayetteville. He had just gotten married, and he was visiting his favorite place in the world, his beach condo in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, when he took his dog for a walk in the woods, and the unthinkable happened. A plane that was flying overhead crashed on him. It was carrying 4 guys on a buddy trip, and the fireball engulfed Fred. In an instant, the man who was just about set to enjoy his retirement, his new marriage, the rest of his life, had third-degree burns on 90% of his body, and a week later, doctors kept him alive but unconscious in a hospital in Charleston, South Carolina, just a few blocks from that AME church, for a few days until he died. Now, the odds of that happening were absolutely astronomical. Media from all over America wrote about this piece, marveling over the freak accident. And Cindy and I were plagued with what-ifs. What if he'd simply walked 5 minutes earlier? What if he'd walked 5 minutes later, gone to the left, gone to the right? But along with the practical what-ifs were also the spiritual whys. Why would a gracious God allow something so senseless, so violent, something so physically painful for this man, and so soul-crushing for his family to happen? And if this is the point in the message where I'm supposed to provide you with a miraculous, soul-satisfying answer about why this or other awful, evil things happen, I'm sorry that I'm going to disappoint you, because I've never quite been able to make sense of that. We tried, we've read books, we've listened to sermons. There was nothing that Cindy or I ever heard that made us go, oh yeah, God, we get it. That's why this happened to her father. So I'm still not sure why it happened to Cindy's father. I'm not sure why a gunman opened fire in Charleston, why a madman detonated bombs in Boston, flew airplanes into towers in New York, opened fire on a club full of our neighbors in Orlando, 2 a.m. on Sunday morning. I'm not sure faith provides easy answers to why. But I am convinced that it provides a pretty good roadmap for what we need to do, for how we need to do it, for where we need to go to get it done, and for when we need to do it, which, as I mentioned earlier, is both after tragedies and immediately in response to instances of darkness in our everyday lives. I find solace in knowing that my faith tells me how to respond. And I want to show you one other thing that I've gleaned from these tragedies, and from knowing that good so outnumbers the bad. You've heard probably that good was outnumbered 49-1 in that club on Saturday morning. Well, there are actually 310 in the club, so now we're 309-1. And then you talk about the 100 or so first responders who got there, and it's 410-1. And then you look at Orlando, and that's about 250,000-1. And you look at the outpouring from Central Florida, and it's 2 million. And the country, it's 370 million. Good will always win over bad. Love will always win over hate. We see instances of that, and much of it is faith-based. But I want to share one last thing that I've gleaned from all these tragedies. And that is the power of living and shining in the moment. Because in the wake of this tragedy, America once again embarked upon, in fact, it's already starting to, these discussions and debates over policies we might, and changes we might make about guns, about immigration, about security, and about personal freedoms. And let me tell you, some of those discussions need to take place. I've spent a good deal writing about some of those in the Sentinel. If you haven't read them, please. Our subscription, really. Their numbers are down. We could use some more circulation. But I'm not going to advocate any of those things tonight, because I have come to one other conclusion that I know many of you share. No matter what laws we pass regarding gun control, immigration, or anything else, I don't believe there is ever anything we are going to be able to do to stop a single madman who wants to get his hands on a gun, a bomb, a chemical weapon, or anything else. So the question I ask myself, that you might ask yourself, is what will my legacy be if something happened in an instant? If this, like it was for the people in Charleston, was the last sanctuary, if the building you walk in tomorrow is the last office building, you run your last road race and the last nightclub you ever walk into, what will the world remember about me? What will my children? I think the question I ask is, did I do as Jesus told us in Matthew and let my light shine before others? Did I let my good deeds glorify God? Did I respond when disaster struck? But also, did I speak up in smaller, subtler ways? Basically, did I spread the light or nourish the darkness? The church as a whole in America has shrunk in recent decades, and I often believe that is because we don't do enough to spread that light. So on the heels of yet another tragedy, this one with a grotesque body count that is just 7.1 miles down the road, I hope we can all recommit. Yes, to praying for the victims and the families, but also to living our lives in a way that attracts people to our faith, in a way that turns up the wattage on our lights to high beam level, so that we can banish darkness every chance we get. Thank you.